Hey, cabbie, ever heard of deodorant? One of them sneered, bursting into laughter. They laughed at the taxi driver's accent until he became their new boss. He smiled through the rearview mirror and said nothing. Day after day, this immigrant taxi driver was mocked for his broken English, his accent, his silence. They called him names, treated him like dirt, and never once imagined the man behind the wheel had once owned a company far greater than the one they now work for. Until the day they walked into the conference room and saw him sitting at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said calmly. "I'm your new CEO. Shall we begin?" Their smirks vanished. But what happened next? That's the part no one expected. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's about dignity, dreams, and the quiet power of never giving up. Stick around. You'll want to see how it ends. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hit that subscribe button and settle in. This story will stay with you. The cold wind slithered through the cracks of the cab's window, and the heater inside wheezed like an old man trying to catch his breath. The dashboard lights flickered for a moment, then steadied. It was a gray Tuesday in late November, and the roads were slick with rain that had turned to a semi-baked muddy slush. Traffic crawled like it was too tired to try anymore. The taxi sat idle by the curb, engine humming, yellow paint faded by years of sun and neglect. Inside, the driver sat still. His hands, weathered and lined, rested gently on the steering wheel like it was made of porcelain. His name tag, pinned carefully to the front of his worn brown jacket, read, Arav. But no one ever asked his name. He adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, not to see the road behind, but to see them. Three of them. Young, loud, wearing suits that cost more than his entire monthly rent. They walked like the sidewalk belonged to them, like the world was just waiting to hand them keys to something shiny. One of them, tall, cocky, probably no older than 25, flung open the door and slid in first. "Yo, move over," he barked at the others. "Dude, I told you, black cabs smell like curry and regret." The other two laughed, loud, careless. The second one elbowed the third, nudging him toward the middle seat. They crammed in, adjusting their watches more than their seatbelts. Arav kept his face neutral. He pressed the meter. "Where to?" he asked, his voice soft, marked by an accent that hadn't faded in 20 years. "Downtown, Mercer and Fifth," the first guy said, barely glancing up from his phone. "And step on it, all right? My espresso window's closing fast." Arav nodded. "Yes, sir." They weren't even listening. The car pulled forward into traffic. Rain tapped against the windshield like fingers drumming with impatience. 2 minutes into the ride, it started. "Hey, cabbie," one of them said loudly. "Ever heard of deodorant?" The three of them erupted into laughter. One slapped the seat, another made exaggerated gagging noises. Arav's fingers tensed slightly on the wheel. He caught their eyes in the rearview mirror and offered the faintest of smiles. He said nothing. "What is that, like onions? Bro, that's aggressive. I feel like I'm marinating." "Jesus, it's like sitting in a spice aisle," buddy, another chimed in. "Dude, where are you from anyway? Bombay or Brooklyn?" "I bet his last job was herding goats," the one in the middle sneered. "Yo, driver, do you understand me?" He said the last part slowly and loudly, overpronouncing every syllable. The others laughed again. Arav didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the road, merging carefully, avoiding potholes with the elegance of someone who knew the city better than most people knew their own homes. There was silence for a moment, until one of them turned to the others. "Remember that Uber we got last week with the British dude? Man, that guy was at least classy. This guy," he jabbed a thumb toward Arav, "he probably got his license in a cereal box." "Cereal? Nah," the middle one snorted. "Probably a dowry." Arav inhaled slowly. His knuckles tightened ever so slightly, but his face remained composed. In his mind, he wasn't in a cab. He was back in a boardroom, sitting at the head of a long glass table. Graphs and numbers lit up the wall. People waited for his word before moving. The room was warm, full of purpose, full of respect. That was another life, another country. Here, he was invisible. "Hey, you married, cabbie?" one of them asked, leaning forward slightly. Bet your wife made you drive this so she didn't have to work. Yeah, man, another chimed in. What do you even do besides drive? You live with your kids or your mother-in-law? This time, Arav spoke. Just a whisper. No wife. Ah, one of them said, faking sympathy. No wife. What happened, man? She run off when she smelled the car? More laughter, and he said nothing, and he kept driving, carefully, smoothly, as if their words didn't try to cut, as if he wasn't bleeding in silence. 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. He could take it. He had taken worse. 12 years ago, he had been someone. Back home, he built a company from nothing, 10 employees, then 50, then hundreds. A technology firm, clean, bright, full of promise. Then came a political shift, a regulatory wall, a betrayal. He lost everything except his son. He brought the boy to America with what was left in his savings. He promised a better life, told him, "We will build again, from nothing, just like before." The boy believed him. So did Arav. But the world here didn't care about what he used to be. They saw a strange name, a strange face, a strange voice, and they labeled him driver, foreigner, other. Hey, buddy, one of them barked from the back, annoyed. Are you even paying attention? That was our turn. Arav nodded. Shortcut. Oh, great, the Curry Compass is leading us now. More laughter, and he turned gently onto Fifth Avenue and finally pulled to a stop in front of a towering office building, all glass and shine. The back doors popped open. They started to climb out one by one, adjusting their suits like the ride had somehow wrinkled them. Dude, next time I'm calling an Uber, one muttered. The last one paused, leaned in slightly, and said just loud enough for Arav to hear, "Hope you save enough for a shower, bro." Arav met his eyes in the mirror. Calm, still, a softness that felt out of place. Have good day, he said simply. The young man snorted, slammed the door, and walked away without tipping. Arav sat in the cab for a moment longer. The silence returned. He looked out at the building in front of him. That building. What they didn't know was this. In that very tower on the 23rd floor sat a boardroom. And in that boardroom, just yesterday, a contract had been signed. A new leadership structure. A new CEO. Him. The driver. He had taken the offer quietly, insisting on a delayed announcement so he could finish out the week with his last few shifts. He told no one. There were things he wanted to remember, things he needed to feel again before stepping back into that world with clean suits and empty smiles. And now there was something else he'd remember too. Those boys, their words, their laughter, not out of anger, not even out of spite, but because someday soon they would walk into a room and see him sitting at the head of the table. And in that moment, it would be their silence that filled the air. Arav started the engine again. The cab pulled away from the curb, swallowed by the rain. Just another fare. Just another step towards something they could never imagine. The apartment door creaked as it opened, the hallway light flickering for a moment before giving up entirely. Arav stepped inside, shoulders heavy, shoes soaked, and collar damp from the long walk up from the curb. The rain had followed him like a shadow. He set down his bag by the door, took off his jacket, and hung it on the same hook he used every day, one of 3 on the cracked wall. The other 2 had remained empty for years. The kitchen was dark except for the soft glow of the street lamp leaking through the window. A single bulb overhead buzzed when he flipped the switch. He moved slowly, like someone older than his years. His knees ached. His back ached. But what hurt more was unseen. He opened the fridge, half a carton of milk, some leftover rice in a stained container, and a single egg. He closed it again without touching anything. He didn't need to eat, not yet. Instead, he turned toward the small wooden table by the window. There, in a tarnished silver frame, sat a photograph. He picked it up carefully, like it might break. In the picture, he was smiling. Broad shoulders, trim beard, a clean suit tailored perfectly to his frame. One arm wrapped around a young boy with sharp eyes and a bright smile. Behind them stood a building made of glass and steel. His building, the company he had built brick by brick, hour by hour. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he whispered, barely audible, "I still remember how you laughed that day. You said, 'Papa, this building is so shiny, it looks like it's made of ice.'" Arav chuckled under his breath. The sound was bitter and sad. The boy in the photo, Ravi, was 17 now, but he didn't live here anymore. No, Ravi hadn't been home in 2 years. Arav's smile faded. He pulled out a worn dining chair and sat. The wood creaked beneath his weight. The silence in the room was so deep it pressed against his ears. No music, no laughter, no footsteps, just the distant hum of traffic below and the sound of his own heartbeat. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a folder marked Resume Sent. Inside were dozens of printed pages. Some had been folded and refolded, some smudged from coffee stains or rain. Names of companies, application dates, rejection emails, carefully printed out and clipped behind each attempt. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. We thank you for your interest, but you are overqualified for this role. Position has been filled. He read them like a man rereading a love letter, except these letters had no warmth, no hope, just the dry language of doors closing. He pushed the folder away. From beneath it, he pulled out an old business card. Its edges were frayed, the print fading. Arav Patel, founder and CEO, Arvani Technologies. He ran his thumb across the word CEO, as if trying to feel it again. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing someone in the room. But there was no one. Just ghosts. Ghosts of who he used to be. Ghosts of a voice that once commanded boardrooms and moved investors with a single sentence. Now, all he moved was a steering wheel. The phone buzzed on the counter, a single text. It was from Ravi. "Hope you're well. College is okay. Finals soon." That was it. No love you, no miss you. Arav stared at the screen. His fingers hovered over the keys. Then slowly he typed, "I'm proud of you, Beta, always." He stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. The silence broke, this time by memory. The last conversation with Ravi came back like a wound reopening. "Why can't you just get a real job, Papa? Why are you driving people around like a servant?" Orav had stood silently by the kitchen counter, stunned. "Do you think I want this?" he finally said. "Do you think this was my dream? Then why don't you go back to where you were a CEO? You were someone there. You're nothing here." That word, nothing, it had sliced through Arav like glass. Ravi stormed out that night. A week later, he was gone. Accepted into college, never came back. Arav hadn't blamed him, not really. He had promised the boy a better life, a father with a legacy, a man who wore suits, not driving gloves. But all he had given him was shame. And tonight, 3 other young men, like Ravi, had mocked him, laughed at his accent, reduced him to a punchline. He rubbed his eyes, then stood up. He walked over to the closet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a locked box. The key was on a string around his neck. He opened it with a quiet click. Inside were certificates, awards, letters of commendation, newspaper clippings, all in a language foreign to most Americans, but proof that once, far away, he had mattered. He took out a single sheet, his master's degree in engineering from a university that, back home, was more respected than Harvard. He held it up to the light and laughed. It wasn't joy, it was disbelief at how quickly the world could forget you. Then his eyes fell to a folded paper tucked into the corner of the box. He took it out, opened it. It was a printed email, the most recent one, from the board of directors at Fairwood Solutions, a medium-sized tech company here in the U.S. They were in trouble, bleeding money, leadership failing. They had found him through a quiet contact. His analysis of their operations, done voluntarily, had impressed them, more than impressed them. They offered him the position of chief executive officer with full control. Start date next week. His fingers trembled slightly as he reread it. No one knew yet, not even Ravi. He hadn't told anyone. He wasn't sure why. Maybe part of him still didn't believe it. Maybe the part of him that had been humiliated so many times by small, cruel voices in the back seat still whispered, "They won't respect you, even now." He folded the letter gently and placed it back into the box. Then he walked to the window, looked out at the city, glowing in orange and red. His breath fogged the glass. He whispered to the night, "This silence, it's going to end." He pressed his palm to the window as if trying to push through it. "They will know who I am, not because I tell them, but because I show them." He turned back toward the kitchen. The fridge light flicked on again. He cracked the egg into a pan, warmed up the rice, and ate standing by the counter. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Because tomorrow he would return to the cab. One more day, maybe two. He wanted to remember the smell of the vinyl seats, the feel of worn-out coins dropped into his palm, the weight of mockery disguised as jokes. Because soon, very soon, he would stand at the head of a long table in the very building those boys had laughed their way into. And when they walked into that room and saw him at the head of the table, it wouldn't be revenge. It would be resurrection. The morning light bled slowly into the city, dull and bruised like a memory. Steam hissed from manholes, and the streets began to fill with the early rhythm of life. Footsteps, horns, rustling newspapers, the faint song of a distant saxophone. No one paid attention to. Arav was already behind the wheel. Same cab, same seat, same silence. He wore the same faded jacket, patched at the shoulder where a careless passenger once tore it with a suitcase wheel. His hands gripped the steering wheel like an old friend, firm but tired. The meter ticked softly as the first fare climbed in. A middle-aged woman, head buried in her phone, never looking up. 32nd and Lex, she said without a glance. Yes, ma'am, he replied. As the cab pulled away from the curb, Arav stared through the windshield, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. In less than 48 hours, he would no longer be a taxi driver. In less than 48 hours, he would walk through the polished glass doors of Fairwood Solutions and take the elevator to the executive floor. Not to deliver someone else, but to arrive as the new CEO. But no one in the cab knew that. To the world, he was still just cabbie. It was strange this life split into two. By day, he ferried strangers across the city, judged by his accent, ignored when he spoke, pitied when he didn't. By night, he reviewed quarterly reports, rebuilt failing departments on paper, and exchanged emails with board members who only knew him as Mr. Patel, never imagining he was the man they might have brushed past on the street with eyes that didn't see. It was a secret life, and it was eating at him. That evening, he returned to the apartment just as the sky gave in to dusk. He removed his shoes at the door, setting them beside the mat that was fraying at the edges. Everything about his home had become tired, just like him. He heated a bowl of lentil soup and sat by the window again, watching the city like a man on the outside of something he once belonged to. His phone buzzed. A name flashed on the screen that made his breath catch. Ravi. He answered quickly, trying not to sound too eager. Hello, Beta. Hey, came the voice, flat, distracted. You busy? No, just dinner. Pause. I got a call today from Mom's sister. Arav went quiet. The air in the room thickened instantly. She said she saw you picking someone up in front of a bank, driving. Still, Arav's fingers tightened around the spoon. She asked me, does your father really drive a taxi now? He closed his eyes. I didn't know what to say, Ravi added, his voice low now. I told her you were consulting, that it was just temporary. Arav took a breath. You don't need to lie for me, son. There was silence on the line. Then Ravi asked, voice cracking just slightly, why are you still doing it, Papa? You're not that man. Arav leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Because sometimes you have to let the world forget you before you remind it who you are. The next day, something happened. It was just past 10 a.m. when three familiar faces hailed his cab. The same three boys from earlier that week. The laughing ones, the cruel ones. He watched them in the mirror as they piled into the back seat. Look who it is, one said. Back again with the flavor cab. They all snickered. Arav didn't speak, not even a nod. The first guy gave an address uptown. As the car pulled into traffic, the mood in the back grew louder, looser. Yo, did you see the memo about the new CEO meeting Monday? One of them asked. Yeah, the second guy said. Whole office is freaking out. No one even knows the guy's name. Came out of nowhere. I heard he's foreign, the first said. Some international consultant or whatever. Probably wears robes and blesses computers with incense. Laughter again. Arav kept his hands steady, his eyes focused, his face still as stone. He knew the company, their company. He had read every name on the employee roster, had seen their faces in the ID database. He knew exactly who they were. He drove them in silence. They didn't recognize him. Why would they? They had never looked at him long enough to see a human being. Just a uniform, a voice with an accent, a man with a steering wheel. As they reached the destination, the first guy tossed a crumpled dollar bill onto the front seat. No tip for the aroma today, my dude, he said with a smirk. Then they were gone. Arav didn't move for several minutes. Then slowly he picked up the dollar, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his wallet beside a picture of Ravi as a child. Let them laugh, he whispered. Just one more day. The morning of the reveal arrived gray and heavy, like the sky knew something was coming. Arav didn't take the cab out that day. Instead, he stood in front of his closet, staring at the single suit he'd kept preserved for years. Navy blue, crisp, waiting. He dressed slowly, deliberately. Need bishoyim unnamed tie, polished shoes, cufflinks. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of returning. He stood before the mirror and looked at himself. Not the cabbie, not the broken man in a rented apartment, but the man he used to be, the one the world had forgotten. He whispered to his reflection, "You are not lost. You are not small." Then he turned and left. The elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor. He stepped out into the sleek lobby of Fairwood Solutions. Employees bustled in all directions. Phones rang, screens flickered, suits whispered. They looked at him curiously, some confused, some indifferent. Arav walked calmly to the conference room, where the board had gathered and nervous employees waited outside the glass walls. He opened the door and stepped in. Chairs shifted, whispers stopped. The room quieted as he approached the head of the table. He turned to the assistant at the door. Would you bring in the junior staff now? I'd like them to hear this. Outside the conference room, the three boys stood huddled, holding coffee and laughing. Meeting's about to start. Let's see what kind of accent our new boss has, one joked. The assistant opened the door. Gentlemen, the CEO would like you inside. They stepped in, still mid-sentence, still smirking. Then they saw him, and their faces changed. Their eyes widened. One dropped his coffee. Arav stood at the head of the table, dressed in his navy blue suit, calm and upright, hands resting on polished wood. Good morning, he said softly. Silence. I believe some of you know me, though not by name. He let the words settle. The room was ice. He looked directly at the three boys. In the back seat of a yellow cab, a man is invisible. He is not a father, not a builder, not a human being. He's just a smell, an accent, a joke. He paused. But in this room, I am your leader, and I will not be invisible anymore. The entire room was frozen in place. No one breathed. Arav continued, if you want to stay here, build here, thrive here, then we begin with respect. Not just for me, but for everyone who walks in with less than you, speaks softer than you, or wears something you don't understand. The three boys looked down at the floor. One whispered, Sir, I didn't know. Arav looked at him, not with anger, but with something colder. Now you do. He turned back to the rest of the room. Shall we begin? Morning broke in hues of soft silver, the city still wrapped in dawn mist. Arav stared at the elevator mirror once more on the ground floor of Fairwood Solutions, the nerves and anticipation coiling in his chest like a restrained storm. Just a day ago, this tall lobby was somewhere he only visited to drop off resumes. Today, it would feel like home. He'd taken a deep breath with each step toward the elevator. Step one, step two, not a cab, not that life. Today is different. His reflection looked resolute yet haunted, like a man emerging from a long tunnel. When the doors slid open on the 23rd floor, he stepped into a corridor that smelled of fresh paint and muted carpets. In a few hours, this floor would belong to him. Yet as he walked, shoulders squared, tie straight, he felt all the weight of those years behind the wheel, the mockery, the self-doubt, the loneliness. At the conference room door, a serious-looking assistant in a gray suit stood waiting. She offered a polite nod and opened the door. Inside, the room stretched out. Polished wood table, panoramic windows, board members seated in leather chairs, faces turned, eyes measured, phones went silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Arav paused for a moment, scanning faces that would soon become his team. "Thank you," he said, voice low but unmistakable. "To start, I'd like to meet with each of you individually for a few minutes. But first, I'd like your attention." He gestured gently, a silent request for undivided focus. When the door closed behind the assistant, he let himself stand tall. "This company," he began, voice measured, "is in trouble. Yes, profits down, morale shaken, people leaving, investors anxious." He paused. "But none of those problems matter if we don't have something to build on. And that something is trust." The board members shifted, their ties and blazers suddenly feeling too tight. When had business rooms become places where flattery spoke louder than sincerity? Arav let the silence breathe. "My background," he continued, "is unlike most you've known. I come from a life filled with resilience. I lost everything once in a country you've likely never visited. I built a company overseas, a joyous, thriving company, then watched it fade due to forces beyond my control." He looked straight at the chairman, who met his gaze. "I was CEO there, not by inheritance but by vision and sweat. And yet, you wouldn't have expected me to walk through your doors this morning. Much like the cabbie they laughed at, you'd assume I couldn't lead here." Heads nodded, they recognized honesty. "But I'm determined to prove it." He paused again, softer now. "I chased this opportunity to show that leadership isn't about where you come from. It's what you do once you're here. It's how you treat people, whether they're at the head of the table or riding in your back seat." A murmur moved through the room, the kind that happens when your voice cracks a window into people's souls. Later that morning, he met with the operations team. Nervous smiles, half-formed questions. He spoke strategy, but more than that, he spoke empathy. At the core of his message was a story. He leaned forward, voice warm. "I once spent a night in a cab, 3 young men mocking my accent. They asked if I knew what deodorant was. They said I smelled." He glanced around the room. "I was invisible to them. But that night, as their laughter echoed, what I had spent years building didn't matter anymore." He closed his eyes for a moment. Humiliation like that stays with you. Some listeners gasped quietly. He continued, "But I didn't quit. Instead, I turned those times into purpose. I studied, I applied, I drove every day. I learned this city from the inside out. And now I stand here to serve you, not to avenge myself." He let that sink in. They could feel it, his truth, his scars, his authenticity. The room transformed from mere listeners to willing participants. Meanwhile, the 3 men from the cab, now employees at Fairwood, stood in the hallway quietly whispering. "Dude, I saw him introducing himself," one said. "He's delivering some speech about humiliation and leadership." The second guy swallowed. "And empathy. He said empathy." The third shook his head, clearing his throat. "He looks like someone who's been through hell, but still decided to care." They braced themselves as the CEO stepped into the hallway after finishing his round of small meetings. Arav saw them. Their heads snapped up. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I want to speak with you." They exchanged glances, doubt mingled with fear. He led them into a spare meeting room, just the 4 of them. The door clicked shut. Inside, Arav said simply, "I want to hear from you." They stared. After a moment, the tallest spoke. "Sir, I'm sorry for what happened in that taxi, for laughing. I was stupid, arrogant, thought I was funny." Arav looked at him. "Thank you." Another spoke up, voice wavering. He asked about your smell. I should have stopped him. He nodded. Sometimes the worst pain is not knowing how to fix what's broken. The third boy said, his tone soft, genuine. We didn't know who you were. Arav let out a soft breath. No, you didn't. I don't hold that against you. They all stared. He continued, but you know now. He pulled a small notebook from his suit pocket, his daily planner. He placed it on the table. That notebook? It's been with me since I started driving here. It has calendars, hours, strategies. It has your names too. The tallest shook his head. You have our names? He smiled gently. How could I not? Some of you came with LinkedIn profiles. Others, I looked through the ID list the day I closed the deal here. Their chests tightened. He spoke softly now. When I walked in today, I knew what I carried. I carried every ounce of pain, every humiliation. Their eyes brimmed. I want you to know, good leadership isn't about holding grudges. It's about giving someone the chance to say, I was wrong, and then guiding them so they don't make the same mistake again. The mood shifted. One of them swallowed and said, Sir, will there be counseling for staff, some training? Arav smiled. Yes, but it starts here. Today, I want you to help build it. If you'll have me, I want you to be part of that change. Outside, the energy was different. The rest of the employees, those who hadn't seen him in the cab, felt it too. This wasn't a business machine. It was a person, a wounded man, yet unbowed. By lunchtime, wheels of change had begun turning. A new mentorship program announced, an interdepartment coffee session scheduled, empathy training included in employee onboarding. Over the next hour, whispers of hope replaced the old cynicism. That evening, Arav returned to his small apartment, not the boardroom, not the headlines, not yet. He sat at the table by the window again. He opened the day's notebook. Under Monday, he had written, first board meetings, introduce program, speak with staff, homesick for cabs sometimes. He smiled, touched the page. Homesick. For the cab. Not exactly. Homesick for truth, for purpose, for a time when a shift ended knowing he'd done something good, no matter how small. He opened a Word document titled Staff Integration Proposal. On one line he typed, include stories of employees' personal journeys in monthly company newsletter. He paused. Robbie's text message buzzed again. Papa, tell me how your first day went. Promise me you're smiling. He paused, then typed back, bittersweet. I saw 3 voices I once held in my hand. Now I taught them to speak with dignity. He took a breath, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He was exhausted. Not because of suits and meetings, but because he had opened a door into vulnerability, a door into leadership, a door into redemption. Arav whispered into the silence, eyes still closed. This is only the beginning. Outside the window, the city lights blinked on. They had no idea how much someone had changed them today, someone they almost overlooked. Arav stepped out of the elevator on his second official day as CEO, and everything was different. The receptionist who barely looked at him yesterday stood up immediately. Good morning, Mr. Patel, she said with a soft smile. He returned it with a nod. Thank you, Maria. The security guard tipped his hat. Morning, boss. Each gesture was small, but heavy with meaning. He had become visible again. He walked down the hallway slowly, letting the quiet thump of his shoes mark time. His presence was no longer questioned, but not yet fully understood. Inside, the air was tense. The building had held its breath since yesterday's reveal, as though waiting for someone to shout, just kidding. But there was no punchline coming. Arav was in charge. At his office door, he paused. For years, he had driven by buildings like this one, wondering if he'd ever step foot inside again. Not as a courier or a cabbie, but as someone who belonged, as someone who decided things. He placed his hand on the doorknob, turned it, and stepped into a space filled with sunlight, sleek furniture, and the scent of possibility. But for a long moment, he just stood there, frozen. Because even now, surrounded by the trappings of success, Arav heard the echoes of strangers laughing from a cab's back seat. He took his seat, His desk was already neatly arranged, nameplate, monitor, folders. A framed photo of his wife and son from 10 years ago sat beside a mug of black coffee. He touched the photo gently. "You would have told me not to waste time proving them wrong," he murmured. "Just prove yourself right." His phone buzzed. A reminder popped up. 10 a.m. Department head meeting. All staff briefing room B. It was time to address the people who had spent months drowning in a failing system. People who had given up on leadership, maybe even themselves. He stood, straightened his tie, and walked toward the conference room. Inside the briefing room, a soft murmur of voices drifted through the air. Around 30 department heads and senior staff were gathered, many of whom still didn't know what to make of the situation. "Is it a temporary hire?" someone whispered. "No, he's the CEO, full contract. I heard he used to drive one of the yellow cabs." As Arav entered, voices dropped to nothing. He walked to the front of the room and turned to face them. No slides, no charts, just a man with something to say. "Good morning," he began. Some nodded, most stared. "I know you've heard a lot about me in the last 24 hours, some of it probably hard to believe, but I want to clear the air right now." He paused. "Yes, I drove a taxi." A few eyes widened. "For years, not because I had no skills, not because I failed, but because life doesn't always wait for your resume to catch up. And sometimes survival is not failure. It's simply survival." The room was still. "But before that, I ran a successful tech company. Before that, I was an engineer. And before that, I was a father trying to build a life in a new country." He glanced around. "Now I'm here, and I didn't come to impress you. I came to build something with you." There was a beat of silence, and then a voice spoke from the back. It was Daniel, the same man who once asked him in the cab if he knew what deodorant was. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Sir," he said, standing slowly, "can I say something?" Arav nodded. "Go ahead." Daniel cleared his throat. I, I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. But even if I had, that doesn't excuse how I treated you. I was raised better than that." All eyes turned. He looked down, ashamed. "I've been thinking about it all night. I told my wife. She cried, said she was disappointed in me. And I realized I don't want to be the kind of man who laughs at someone trying to make a living." Arav said nothing for a moment. Then gently, "We all have moments we're not proud of, Daniel. The difference is in what we do after." Daniel nodded, sitting down with glassy eyes. Later that day, Arav met with HR and requested a list of employees who'd received complaints for bullying or discriminatory remarks over the last 6 months. "I want to talk to them, not punish," he told the HR director. "They need to hear a story. Then they can decide who they want to be." The HR director blinked. "You're not looking to fire anyone. Only if they stay the same." That evening, Arav sat alone in his office, the city skyline glowing behind him. He reviewed staff files, flagged departments that needed support, and drafted a company-wide memo titled, "The Culture We Will Become." As he worked, he heard a knock on the door. It was Nina, a young intern he hadn't spoken with yet. "Mr. Patel, I just wanted to say thank you." He looked up. "For what?" "For showing us it's okay to come from struggle. Most of us hide our stories because we're afraid they'll be used against us." He nodded slowly. "Then let's change that." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Can I tell you something personal?" "Of course." "My dad used to clean offices in this city. He worked nights. I was embarrassed to tell anyone that. I always lied, said he worked in finance." Her voice cracked. "But after yesterday, I went home and told him I was proud." Arav smiled, warm, grateful. "That's the best thing I've heard all day." She left and he sat back, the weight of that small exchange making his chest tighten. Not from pain, but from recognition. Later, he called Ravi. "Hey, Papa," his son answered. "How's the boss life?" Arav chuckled softly. "Tiring, but fulfilling." A pause. "I saw your story trending on LinkedIn. Someone posted about your first speech. Said you brought the room to tears." "I just told the truth," Arav replied. Ravi hesitated, then said, I'm proud of you, Dad. I don't think I've ever said that out loud before. Arav swallowed. I'm proud of you, too. Silence. Then Ravi asked, do you miss the cab? Arav thought for a moment. Yes, he said finally. Not the ridicule, but the clarity. In that seat, I saw everything. Struggle, hope, arrogance, pain. It taught me more about leadership than any textbook. Ravi laughed softly. You always find the gold in the ashes. Arav smiled. That's the only way to survive, son. That night, Arav walked out of the building just as a yellow cab pulled up to the curb to drop someone off. The driver gave him a nod, unknowing, distant. Arav walked over and tapped the hood gently. How's the night been? Slow, the driver shrugged, but it picks up after 10. He paused, then added, You ever driven one of these? Arav smiled. Yes, a long time ago. The driver chuckled. You don't look like it now. Arav's smile faded just a bit, his tone softening. You'd be surprised what people used to look like before the world stopped seeing them. Then he turned and walked away, back into the city he once served and now led. The morning sun cast long, soft rays through the tall office windows as Arav stood at the head of the conference room table, looking at the people seated before him. It had been 3 weeks since he first stepped into this very spot as CEO, a position earned not by pedigree, but by perseverance, honesty, and resilience. But today felt different. Today he sensed that something quieter, more powerful was unfolding. The low hum of conversation dwindled as he cleared his throat. Good morning, everyone, he began, voice calm yet steady. I want to talk about cycles today, about how where we begin isn't always where we end. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room, then landed on 3 familiar faces seated together by the window. It was them, Daniel, Eric, and Marcos, the same 3 young men who once mocked his accent in a yellow cab. They looked up at him, their expressions unreadable. Anxiety, regret, something softer. Hope? He took a breath. This past week, we launched the Integration Initiative. You shared your stories. We created policies around trust and openness. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Heads nodded. Somewhere someone murmured agreement. But today, he said, I want to do something differently. He walked slowly across the room, approachable yet commanding presence intact. When he reached the trio, he stopped. Gentlemen, would you stand, please? They shifted, uncertainty in their eyes. As my first act of leadership, and as a gesture of where we are going as a company, I invite you to join me to the front. At this, the rest of the room looked on. Daniel hesitated, then stood. Eric and Marcos followed. They walked beside him to the head of the table. Arav turned to face them. Then he turned to the whole room. This is the moment of full circle, not only for me, but for every one of us who once believed someone's background defined their future. These 3 once laughed at me, but instead of walking away, they stayed. Instead of hiding their guilt, they faced it. And instead of letting their past define their character, they used it to grow. He looked back at them, voice soft, emotional. I'm proud of you, he said to Daniel, Eric, and Marcos. Daniel's eyes glistened. Thank you, sir. Arav smiled. There will always be moments we wish we could take back, but there's no shame in starting again. A voice at the end of the table asked, Sir, will there be room for more to step forward? Arav nodded. Yes, that's the whole point. Later that day, Arav opened his office door and paused. Daniel, Eric, and Marcos were waiting. Sir, Daniel said, stepping forward. His voice cracked slightly. May we speak with you? Arav gestured for them to enter. Once inside, Eric spoke first. Sir, I got your note. You told us you'd meet someone who once treated you badly to check on their well-being. A cab driver, a CEO. It's poetic. Arav leaned forward. Yes, I wanted to see him again. Not to make him remember, but to make him feel seen. Do you want to come with me? They nodded without hesitation. An hour later, the 4 men stood side by side on a busy corner downtown. A yellow cab idled at the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and driving gloves worn thin from years, looked up as he exited the cab. Arav drew in a slow breath. "He's here," he whispered. The driver straightened, puzzled. Arav approached and tapped gently on the roof. The driver looked around, then recognized him. "Arav?" he said softly. "Yes," he replied, voice thick. The driver swallowed, looking between Arav and the three young men standing respectfully behind him. "Sir," the driver began, voice catching. "It's been a long time." Arav reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he said, turning to Daniel, Eric, and Marcos. "Come forward." They stepped ahead. Daniel swallowed, voice low. "Sir, I never thanked you." The driver, older now, eyes glistened. "Son, I don't need thanks." A beat, but then Eric spoke. It meant something. The driver looked puzzled. Marcos added, voice soft, "Your resilience, it started something. Within me. I needed to apologize." Silence. Then the driver turned to Arav. "Son, this is unexpected." Arav let the moment stretch, then said, "I wanted them to meet you so they understand there's a person behind every seat in the back, a life behind every accent." He looked at the driver. "This man changed our company." Tears shined in the driver's eyes. He swallowed, voice thick. "I don't know what to say." Arav stepped closer, spoke softly. "Just this. Thank you for who you are, for who you showed us we could be." The yellow cab's engine purred. Pedestrians crossed, horns blared. It was every man's world once more. But right here, between four men, it was pure grace. Back in the office, Arav stood in the lobby later that evening. A security officer approached. "Sir, I have a message for you." Arav nodded. The officer handed him an envelope, unsealed, handwritten. Inside, he found a note. "To the man who taught me to see the driver inside every stranger, thank you. Sincerely, John Peterson." Arav turned it over to reveal a business card taped to the back. "Senior consultant, Mercer and Company." He swallowed hard. "Someone he worked with years ago from the company he led abroad. They wanted to reconnect." That day had truly come full circle. That evening, Arav walked past the elevator again, this time alone. He stopped. He placed a hand on the mirrored wall. All those years in silence, in the back seat, in the apartment, in the conference room, every step had led here. He closed his eyes, letting a single tear escape. Then he drew in a breath. Steady. The ride had ended, but the journey hadn't. He whispered to his reflection, "Thank you for remembering." And with that, he turned and walked forward, bars of light dancing around him through the glass walls, as a man reborn, a leader fulfilled, and now fully seen. The office was silent when Arav walked in the next morning. Not the kind of silence that meant people were afraid, but the kind that meant something sacred was beginning to grow. He could feel it, like a storm had passed and left behind still water. Stillness, but not emptiness, the kind of quiet that follows truth. He passed through the hallway, not rushing, greeting each employee with a simple nod or a soft good morning. People responded more now, not just with words, but with something deeper. Respect. And not the kind earned by barking orders or flaunting titles. This was a quiet kind of power, the kind you couldn't fake, the kind that wasn't loud, but lasted longer than anything else. Arav had once believed that real power meant being heard, but now he knew real power was being remembered, for how you made people feel, for the space you created for others to rise. And today he was about to test just how deep that kind of power could go. At 10 o'clock a.m., the company-wide open forum meeting began. Employees from every floor, junior staff to senior executives, filed into the large atrium where folding chairs had been set up. The last time they'd gathered like this was over 2 years ago, under a previous CEO who barked into a microphone and left people afraid to speak. Today would be different. There was no podium, no PowerPoint, just Arav sitting on a simple wooden stool, hands resting on his knees. He didn't start with a speech. He didn't tell them what to do. He just waited. For a few moments, no one said a word. Then a soft voice came from the back. It was Nina, the intern who'd once shared her father's janitorial story. "Sir," she said, standing slowly, "what gave you the strength to stay quiet when people laughed at you?" Arav turned his head toward her, eyes gentle. "Because I knew who I was, even when they didn't." She blinked back tears. "I want that strength. I've spent most of my life trying to speak perfectly. Dress right, fit in." He smiled. "Fitting in is the fastest way to disappear." A low hum of agreement spread through the room. Then James, a black veteran in the finance department, raised his hand. "I saw you drive that cab," he stated, standing. "2 years ago, I didn't recognize you until this week. I sat in the back. I said nothing. But I remember your eyes." Arav nodded. "I just wanted to say you carried more dignity in that front seat than some CEOs I've worked under carried in corner offices." Someone clapped. Then more followed. Arav raised a hand gently. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," he said. "I was just surviving. And that's what I want to talk about today." The room leaned in. "There are people in this building," and he continued, "who clean our floors at night. People who answer our phones, drive our deliveries, serve coffee in the lobby. And we barely see them. We speak past them. We laugh about where they're from." He let the silence settle. "I know, because I was one of them. You didn't see me, either." Now the room was silent, not with discomfort, but realization. He stood slowly. "I want to create a company where no one ever feels like a ghost, where kindness is policy, where dignity isn't earned by your job title, it's honored in your presence." He took a breath. "And that starts now." After the forum, Arav returned to his office and called in the head of HR, the diversity officer, and the facilities manager. "I want every department to shadow someone from the night shift," he said, "once a month, from top down, including me." The HR director blinked. "You mean executives? Cleaning with the janitors?" "Exactly." Facilities manager, a stocky, older man with silver hair, leaned forward. "No one's ever done that, sir." "Then we'll be the first." That evening, Arav stayed late. When the office emptied, he changed into jeans, a plain black shirt, and sneakers. He grabbed gloves and a supply cart. And at 9:00 p.m., when the janitorial team walked in, they were stunned to find their CEO waiting with them. "You're not serious," said Mike, a cleaner who'd worked there for 12 years. Arav smiled. "You've kept this place standing for over a decade. I think it's time I saw how." For the next 4 hours, he swept, scrubbed, and took out trash. He asked questions, laughed, listened. He worked alongside people who had never been in the boardroom, but who now felt seen by the man who sat at the head of it. At 1:00 a.m., as the shift ended, Mike handed him a water bottle. "You didn't have to do this," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Arav looked at him, voice low. "That's exactly why I did." Word spread. The next morning, a video surfaced, recorded by a security guard. Arav scrubbing bathroom tiles with Mike beside him. The clip went viral inside the company, then outside. Comments flooded in. "Leadership isn't a title. It's this. I've worked 17 years and never seen a CEO like this. This man is rewriting what dignity looks like." By noon, news outlets had reached out, but Arav refused interviews. He told his assistant, "I didn't do it to be seen. I did it so someone else could be." That afternoon, Daniel knocked on his door. "Sir, do you have a minute?" Arav gestured him in. Daniel sat across from him, hands clasped. "I spoke to my father this morning." "Oh?" Arav asked. "He's in hospice care. I told him everything about you, about the cab, what I said, what I did." He paused. "He cried," Daniel said, voice cracking. "Said he's proud of me for the first time in years." Arav's voice softened. "And are you proud of yourself?" Daniel looked down. "I'm trying to be." Arav stood and walked around the desk. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Then that's more than enough." The following week, a letter arrived at Arav's office. No return address. Handwritten. Inside was a note. "You drove me once. I was drunk, rude, said horrible things. You didn't say a word. Just drove me home safe. I saw your story. I'm not asking forgiveness. Just thank you for your grace. You changed me, even in silence. Arav closed the letter, his hands trembling slightly. He stared out the window. Quiet power. That night, Arav returned to his small apartment, the same one he kept, even now. He cooked rice and lentils, sat on the floor like he used to. He thought of the countless nights he'd come home from driving, ashamed, aching, exhausted. And now, Swam, he was building a company where no one had to hide who they were, not even themselves. As he finished dinner, he lit a candle, not for religion, but memory. He whispered, to those who stayed silent, to those who were overlooked, may you always know you were never invisible. You were the foundation. He let the candle burn, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. Real, full peace, and not from power, but from quiet. The boardroom was unusually quiet. No buzzing laptops, no side conversations, just the hum of the AC and the palpable tension of three young men sitting across from Arav, each of them once part of the cruel laughter that followed him through every cab ride. Daniel, Eric, Marcos. They hadn't spoken to each other much since the day Arav took over. Not really. Surface talk, polite nods, careful questions. But deep down, each of them had been circling the same question. What do we do with the shame we carry? Arav entered the room with a calm, almost weightless energy. He wore no suit, just a plain button-up and jeans. He sat at the head of the table, not as a CEO today, but as a man. Thank you for coming, he began. Daniel shifted in his chair, voice low. You asked us to be here, not as employees, but as people, right? Arav nodded. That's right. Marcos looked down at his hands. So, what do we say? Arav leaned forward, fingers laced. Maybe start with the truth. There was a long pause. Then Eric, always the loudest among them before, broke the silence with something no one expected. I've never told anyone this, he said, voice shaking. But the day we laughed at you in the Guam, my dad had just called me, told me he was disappointed in me. Again, I was angry. I needed to feel powerful. He blinked, ashamed. So I mocked you, because you couldn't hit back, because I thought it made me strong. He swallowed. I've been trying to forget that night ever since. Daniel exhaled sharply. You remember what I said, right? The deodorant comment? God, I still hear it in my sleep. Marcos nodded, eyes wet. You looked at us in the mirror and smiled. You didn't say a word. That smile haunted me. They sat in silence, grown men suddenly looking like boys who had just realized the cost of their cruelty. Arav didn't flinch, didn't lecture. He let the weight of their words fill the room. Then he spoke. I didn't smile because I was okay, he said quietly. I smiled because I knew I couldn't let hate be the last word between us. He looked at them one by one. I drove 12 hours that day. My back hurt. My hands were numb from gripping the wheel. But what cut deepest was not your words. It was how familiar they felt. Eric looked confused. Familiar? Yes, Arav said, because I'd heard them before, from customs officers, from landlords, from strangers on the train, and each time I lost a little more of my voice. He paused. And still I stayed quiet because I believed the world would never listen to me anyway. Daniel whispered, we were part of that silence. Arav nodded. Yes, but what you didn't know was, that night after dropping you off, I parked 3 blocks away and cried in the driver's seat. Even Marcos, a man who rarely showed emotion, let a tear fall. Eric looked down at the table. Why are you telling us this now? Why not fire us? Punish us? Because this story isn't about punishment, Arav replied. It's about what we do with guilt. He stood and walked to the window. For years, I let shame eat away at who I was. I came to this country thinking hard work would be enough. It wasn't, so I became invisible. He turned back to them. But you have a chance to use your past differently, not to hide from it, not to wallow in it, but to serve with it. Daniel's voice cracked. How? Tell your story, Arav said, not as heroes, but as the ones who once failed and chose not to fail again. Later that week, Arav announced a new initiative within the company called the Mirror Project. Every month, one employee would share a story, raw, unfiltered, about a mistake they'd made and what it taught them. The goal wasn't shame, it was transformation. The first volunteers? Daniel, Eric, Marcos. When they stepped onto the small internal stage at the next all-hands meeting, people expected corporate speak, maybe a PR spin, but what they heard was something else entirely. Daniel went first. I used to think success meant looking clean, sounding perfect, staying above people who struggled. Then I laughed at a man who would one day become my boss, and he didn't fight back. He forgave me. He looked up, eyes red. That moment changed me. I still have a lot of work to do, but I've learned that silence can be louder than rage. And kindness, it humbles you. Eric followed. I grew up believing strength meant domination. I never learned how to listen until the person I mocked invited me to stand beside him, not below him. That invitation, it healed something in me I didn't know was broken. Then Marco stepped up. I don't speak much. I used to joke because I was afraid people would see my own brokenness. But now I choose to speak because I want to see others really see them. The room gave them a standing ovation, but it wasn't for bravery. It was for honesty. That night, Arav sat in his office, alone, watching the recording of their speeches. As Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers, he felt something stir inside, a mix of grief and pride. He remembered the long nights, the quiet car rides, the weight of silence. And now this. He didn't just change their lives, they were changing others. He closed his laptop and stood. Just then there was a knock. It was Nina, the intern. Sir, she said gently, I saw the meeting, and I've been writing something for the Mirror Project, but I don't know if it's good enough. Arav smiled. You don't need perfect words, Nina. You just need truth. She nodded, voice trembling. Can I read it to you? Of course. She opened her notebook. My name is Nina. I was embarrassed of my father's accent. He worked janitorial shifts, and I never told my classmates. I pretended he was someone else until the day I saw our CEO sweeping the hallway. And I realized I'd been ashamed of the wrong things. Arav didn't speak. He simply stood, crossed the room, and hugged her. Not as a CEO, not as a mentor, but as someone who had once been just as ashamed of himself and now no longer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the glass walls of the building, the story of the three became something far more powerful than an apology. It became a turning point, not just for Daniel, Eric, and Marcos, but for an entire company, for every person who had ever said the wrong thing and wanted to do better, for every immigrant who had been laughed at and stayed silent, for every quiet soul who wondered if they mattered. Arav had always known that power didn't come from speaking the loudest. Now, his whole company knew it too, because when dignity leads, hearts follow. And when the broken step forward with truth, the world listens in awe. Arav was reviewing a proposal in his office when his assistant's soft knock interrupted the silence. Mr. Malhotra, she said, poking her head in, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he said you knew him from, a long time ago, from before. Arav looked up slowly. Did he give a name? She hesitated. He said, tell him it's Liam. The pen slipped from Arav's hand. His chest tightened. Liam, he hadn't heard that name in almost 9 years. Send him in, Arav said quietly. The door opened, and in walked the man Arav had once called his brother, not by blood, but by bond. Liam looked older. His blonde hair had thinned, his eyes sunken with years of something he couldn't quite hide. Guilt, maybe. Regret. Time. He paused, standing in front of the desk. Hey, Liam said, voice rough. Arav didn't move. Hey. There was a long silence. You look different, Liam said. So do you, Arav replied. But not really. Liam gave a broken laugh. I wasn't sure you'd see me. I wasn't sure I should. Liam took a step forward, his eyes scanning the office. The framed certificate on the wall, the stack of letters on the corner, the small clay elephant still sitting on the shelf, one of the only things Arav had kept from his first apartment. "You kept that?" Liam asked, pointing to the elephant. "I did. I gave it to you when you moved into that shoebox apartment, remember?" Liam chuckled, then looked down. "Back when we were still friends." Arav didn't answer. "I came," Liam said, voice cracking, "to say I'm sorry." Arav raised an eyebrow. "After all these years?" "I didn't know how to face you, not after what I did." Arav stood now. He walked around the desk slowly, not out of anger, but something heavier. "You didn't just abandon me, Liam. You humiliated me." Liam swallowed hard. "I lost my visa," Arav continued. "You knew that. You were my sponsor, and you let it expire while I worked for you, under the table. I trusted you. I thought it would buy us time," Liam began. "No," Arav said sharply. "You thought it would save you from taxes, from paperwork, from the system. You used me." Liam's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was scared." "So was I," Arav shouted for the first time. "I lived in fear for years. Every time a siren passed, every time someone had asked for ID, I lost everything, Liam. My dignity, my name, my life. While you, what, got promoted?" Liam shook his head. "No, I didn't get promoted. I got fired a year after you left. The company found out about the payroll fraud." Arav blinked. "I lost my job, my house, my wife left. I deserved all of it." He looked up, eyes glassy. "But what I didn't deserve was your silence." Arav turned away. "I wrote to you, Arav," Liam said, "so many times. I sent letters, emails. I came to your old place. Nothing." "I was driving a cab by then," Arav said, "sleeping 4 hours a night, hiding from immigration officers. You think I had time to read your guilt?" Liam stepped closer. "I was wrong. I was a coward. I thought I was helping you by staying out of your life. But I see now, I was just protecting myself." There was a pause, and then Arav whispered, "Why now? Why come here now?" Liam took something out of his pocket, a letter, old, wrinkled, but still sealed. "I wrote this 8 years ago," he said, "and I never mailed it, because I didn't think I had the right." He placed it on the desk. "Then I saw the news, saw your face, saw you scrubbing floors with your staff, and I thought, that's not the man I used to know. That's someone stronger, wiser, someone I don't deserve to know anymore." He looked down, "But I came anyway." Arav stared at the envelope. "I didn't want to hate you," he said finally, "but I needed someone to blame." "I know," Liam whispered. "I lost my family's respect. I couldn't send money home. I missed my mother's funeral because I was afraid I wouldn't be let back into the country." Liam's face fell. "I'm sorry," he said, tears running freely now. "I can't take back what I did, but I want to be the kind of man who owns it, even if it's too late." The room fell into silence again. For a moment, all that existed were two broken men and the space between them. Then Arav asked softly, "Do you know what I hated the most?" Liam shook his head. "That after everything, I still missed you." Liam let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a breath. "You were my friend," Arav continued. "My first friend in this country. You taught me how to ride the subway. You helped me get my first job. You brought me home on Thanksgiving. I believed you were family." "I wanted to be," Liam whispered. "I just didn't know how to be both family and honest." Arav stared at him. Then slowly he walked to the desk, picked up the letter, and opened it. The writing was shaky, dated nearly a decade ago. "Arav, I messed up. I tried to pretend what I did wasn't that bad, but it was. I hurt you. I betrayed you. You believed in me, and I failed you. If you never speak to me again, I understand. But please know this. You made me a better man, even in your silence. I hope one day I'll be worthy of your forgiveness. Liam." Arav folded the letter quietly. He looked up at Liam, who now stood shaking, unsure whether to stay or run. I don't know if I can forgive you, Arav said softly. Not today. Liam nodded slowly. I didn't expect you to. But, Arav added, I can't carry this anger anymore. It's heavy. It doesn't help me. And I don't want it passed down to anyone else. He walked toward Liam. You were a chapter in my life, not the whole book. Liam's lip trembled. Do you mean that? I do. They stood in silence, two men holding the weight of their shared past and somehow beginning to release it. I can't change what happened, Liam said. But if there's ever a way to help, I'll be there, I mean it. Arav nodded. Then start by helping someone else. The next immigrant who trusts you. The next person who doesn't know the rules. Do for them what you couldn't do for me. Liam looked him in the eyes. I will. He turned to go, but at the door he stopped. By the way, Liam said, voice steadier now, your company, it's more than a business, it's a lighthouse. Arav blinked. A lighthouse? Yeah, Liam smiled. A place that shows people where land is, where home is, even when they're lost at sea. He walked out, leaving Arav standing alone, the letter still warm in his hands. That night, Arav sat in his apartment, looking through old photos on his phone. Many blurry, others pixelated, but one stood out. A picture of him and Liam on a rooftop 10 years ago, smiling with beer bottles in hand. He stared at it for a long time. Then slowly he tapped archive. Not delete, not favorite, just a place for the past. And for the first time in years, he whispered aloud, I'm letting go. Not because you deserve peace, but because I do. And somewhere in the silence, something heavy finally lifted. The company used to run on silence. People showed up, did their jobs, nodded politely in meetings, and left. No one asked how you were doing. No one talked about where they came from, what they carried, or what it cost them to smile. It was a place of surface-level efficiency, shiny on the outside, hollow on the inside. Until Arav stepped in. The first signs of change were subtle. One Monday morning, a custodian named Dolores found a handwritten thank you note on her cart. To the person who makes this place clean when no one's watching. Thank you, you matter here. It wasn't signed, but she knew. She had once seen Arav helping another custodian pick up spilled coffee without saying a word. Soon other notes followed. Then came the meetings, ones where titles were stripped away, where managers and interns sat side by side and shared stories, not spreadsheets. It wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was becoming a place where people were seen. But not everyone was happy about it. Behind closed doors, some of the senior executives grumbled. All this kumbaya crap, muttered one VP. We're running a business, not a therapy circle. Another scoffed. What's next? Hug breaks? They didn't understand. But Arav wasn't trying to impress them. He was trying to heal something. And then, one morning in April, everything changed. It started like any other Tuesday. Arav arrived early, took the elevator alone, and stopped by the break room to refill the coffee supplies. He liked to start the day in the most human way possible, with the little things. He walked into the conference room for a scheduled presentation by Human Resources. The topic? A new recruitment program aimed at hiring underrepresented voices. But when the meeting began, the HR director was nowhere to be found. Instead, a trembling young man stood at the front. Where's Marlene? Someone whispered. The young man cleared his throat. I'm stepping in today, he said. My name is Tyler. I'm the HR assistant. Murmurs echoed through the room. Senior staff shifted uncomfortably. Tyler continued. Ms. Marlene had a medical emergency this morning, and she asked me to walk you through the proposal. Arav leaned forward, watching. Tyler adjusted his glasses, his hands shaking slightly. This program is called Bridge the Silence. It focuses on hiring immigrants, veterans, formerly incarcerated individuals, people whose resumes don't shine but whose stories might. A low chuckle came from the back. A regional manager. Sounds like a charity case, he muttered. Tyler heard it. Everyone did. He froze. His breathing quickened. His papers slipped from his hands and scattered to the floor. And the room went silent. All eyes turned to him. Embarrassment, fear, shame. He bent to pick them up quickly, muttering apologies. His voice cracked. Sorry, I'm not used to this. Just then Arav stood, not with anger, with purpose. He walked to the front of the room and knelt down beside Tyler. Together they picked up the papers. Slowly, silently. Then Arav rose, took the clicker from the table, and turned to the screen. This isn't a charity, he said calmly. This is how we build the kind of company we'll be proud to tell our children about. He handed the clicker back to Tyler. You've got this, Arav whispered. We believe in you. Tyler stared at him, stunned. Then he nodded, straightened his spine, and kept going. By the end of the presentation, no one was smirking. And after the meeting, something unexpected happened. The regional manager who laughed? He approached Arav in the hallway, eyes heavy. I have a brother, he said, came out of prison 5 years ago. Can't get hired anywhere. Maybe this bridge thing could help him. Arav didn't gloat. He just placed a hand on the man's shoulder and said, tell him to apply. Words spread like wildfire. Something was happening. The next month, a man named Eddie was hired through Bridge the Silence. Mid-50s, soft-spoken, formerly homeless. He'd once run a repair business until medical bills and addiction wiped it out. No one expected much from him until the day the server room crashed. Everyone panicked. It was out sick, and with thousands of dollars in data on the line, a full outage could cost the company dearly. Eddie, who'd been quietly fixing a door hinge nearby, overheard the commotion. I used to do network setups, he said almost apologetically. They let him try. 10 minutes later, he had everything running, faster than before. From that day on, he wasn't the old guy fixing doorknobs. He was Eddie, the man who saved the system. In the cafeteria, a small board appeared. At first, it looked like nothing, a pinboard titled, This Is Me. Employees began posting pictures, childhood photos, family, poems, notes to loved ones. One day, Arav added a photo, him in his yellow taxi, smiling faintly through the mirror. Beneath it, he wrote, I once drove 300 miles in a single night to feed my family. I was not a CEO. I was a man who refused to break. This is me. By the end of the week, the board was full, and then came the tragedy. It was a rainy Friday when news broke. Claire, a customer service rep, had been found unconscious in her apartment. Suicide attempt. She survived, but barely. The entire floor went still when they heard. Claire had always smiled, brought cookies, wrote little jokes on sticky notes, and left them on coworkers' desks. No one saw it coming. Arav left a meeting mid-sentence when he got the call. He sat in the hospital for hours waiting to speak to her family. Then when Claire woke, he went in alone. She looked frail, eyes sunken. I'm sorry, she whispered. Arav sat beside her, silent for a long time. Then he said, You don't have to be. I felt invisible, she whispered. Even with the changes, even with the stories. I thought no one would notice if I disappeared. Arav took her hand. I noticed, and I'm sorry we didn't see you sooner, but I see you now, Claire. She cried then, not from pain, from being seen. When she returned weeks later, the entire company had changed. A mental health lounge had been built. Counseling offered, voluntarily, confidentially. Time-off policies restructured. Managers trained not in corporate jargon, but in presence. And on the main wall in the lobby, they painted a mural. Not of a product, not of their logo, but of dozens of faces, employees from every background, every role. At the center, Claire smiling, holding a sticky note that read, You matter. Stay. By year's end, profits had doubled, but that wasn't the real headline. The real success? Turnover dropped by 43%. Internal promotions tripled. 5 new initiatives were launched. Mentorship for at-risk youth, returnships for caregivers, programs for veterans and immigrants. But perhaps the biggest change was invisible. It was in how people looked at each other now, with kindness, with memory, with courage, because of one man who once stayed silent and chose not to anymore. And because of a company that finally remembered what it meant to be human. One night, Arav walked through the empty building, past the mural, the break room, The old server room. He stopped by the janitor's closet. It was unlocked. Inside, someone had placed a small framed quote on the shelf. The ones we overlook often carry the keys to our survival. He smiled, he turned out the light, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had something to prove. He felt home. The call came just after sunrise. Arav was sitting in his small kitchen, sipping chai as he did every morning. Alone, peaceful, grateful. Then his phone rang. He recognized the number. It was from the hospital. "Mr. Malhotra?" the voice said gently. "Yes." "I'm calling about Mr. Howard Bell. You're listed as his emergency contact." Arav's heart stuttered. Howard, the old man who had once spat insults from the back of his cab, the same man who, months later, had shown up at the company's front desk trembling, defeated, and needing work. A man Arav had hired, not out of revenge, but compassion. A man who had slowly and painfully transformed from bigot to something resembling family. Is he? Arav asked. "He's fading. There's not much time." A pause. "He's asking for you." The hospital room smelled like rubbing alcohol and endings. Howard lay in the bed, thinner than Arav remembered, his skin pale like paper and his hands curled in on themselves. Machines beeped steadily, delicate reminders that the thread of life was thinning. Arav stepped in quietly. Howard opened one eye. A weak smile cracked across his face. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came," Arav replied, pulling a chair beside him. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic." Howard chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Well, I couldn't just go without making your life inconvenient one last time." They both smiled. Then silence. Thick, honest. "I thought I had more time," Howard murmured. "Don't we all?" Arav said softly. "I had a dream last night," Howard continued, eyes glassy. "I was back in your cab. God, I was such an ass to you." "You were," Arav said bluntly. Howard gave a soft laugh, followed by a violent cough. "I don't know why you took me in," he said. "After all the crap I said. After the way I treated you." Arav looked down. "Because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be looked at and seen as less." A pause. "And I also knew people could change." Howard nodded slowly, tears forming. "My son still won't speak to me," he said quietly. "My fault. I was hard on him, hard on everyone. Thought toughness was the same as love." He stared at the ceiling. "I didn't know how to be soft. Not until it was too damn late." Arav placed a hand over Howard's frail fingers. "It's not too late." Howard looked at him. "You mean that?" "I do." A long pause. "I watched you," Howard said, his voice thinning. "After you hired me, I saw how you treated everyone, the janitor, the interns, the execs. I thought I was coming to work for a company, but I walked into something else." His eyes glistened. "You made me want to be good," he whispered. "That was the real shock. Not your title, not your office, but how you forgave a man like me." Arav felt his throat tighten. "I didn't forgive you right away," he said, "but I saw that you were trying. That mattered." Howard smiled. "I wrote you something. It's in the drawer. The nurse said you'd come. I told her he always shows up, even when you don't deserve him." Arav opened the drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope, trembling in his hand. "I want you to read it at the company meeting next week," Howard said. Arav raised an eyebrow. "You want me to read your letter? To everyone?" Howard nodded. "Let them know it's never too late to change. Not even for an old bastard like me." Arav grinned. "You sure about that language?" Howard winked. "Clean it up if you must." His breathing slowed. The machine beeped louder now, slower. "Tell your staff," Howard murmured. "Tell them grace is real. Tell them that some of us are saved. Not by God, not by fate, but by second chances." Arav leaned closer. Howard squeezed his hand, one final burst of strength. "I'm not afraid to go," he whispered, "because I finally know I didn't waste it all." Tears slid down Arav's cheeks now. "Thank you, Howard." "No, thank you, son." Then the monitor flatlined. One long, empty beep, and Howard Bell was gone. The funeral was simple, no flowers, no family, just a small wooden box and a few coworkers from the company. Arav paid for it himself. He had the urn placed in a cemetery under a tree where sparrows nested. He paid the groundskeeper extra to place fresh coffee beside the gravestone every Sunday morning. Black, no sugar, just how Howard liked it. 1 week later, the quarterly staff meeting began. The entire company sat gathered in the main auditorium. Most expected a financial update, new goals, announcements. Instead, Arav walked up carrying a sealed letter. "I want to tell you about someone," he said. "A man most of you didn't know well. Some of you may have disliked. Some of you never noticed." He unfolded the letter. "To the people of this company. My name is Howard Bell. I used to be a man full of anger, of fear, of ignorance. I took it out on anyone different from me, especially those who came from other places, spoke other tongues, looked unlike me. I was wrong. Every day I worked here, I saw what kindness looked like. It didn't wear a suit. It didn't raise its voice. It held doors. It remembered birthdays. It forgave when it had every reason not to. Arav Malhotra saved my life, not with medicine, not with speeches, but with one simple, terrifying gift, a second chance. I don't deserve to be remembered as a good man, but maybe, just maybe, someone will read this and choose differently than I did. If you see someone struggling, offer a hand. If you feel hate, ask where it comes from. If you are given power, use it gently. And if you're ever riding in a cab, smile at the driver. You never know who he might become. Farewell." Howard Bell. When Arav looked up, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Some wept openly, others bowed their heads. And in that silence, something sacred was shared. Not shame, not pity, but a soft collective understanding. That people can change, that forgiveness is not weakness. That farewell doesn't mean forgotten. After the meeting, employees began coming up one by one. A former manager hugged Arav tightly. "My father died before I could make things right, but that letter gave me hope." A young woman whispered, "My uncle talks like Howard used to. Maybe I'll write him. Maybe I won't wait." And then Tyler, the once nervous HR assistant, came up last. "I put this on Howard's desk the day he died," he said, handing Arav a folded napkin. Written in thick black ink were the words, "It's never too late to start being who you should have been." Arav stared at the napkin, and suddenly he knew what the final chapter of the company's story would be. Not profit margins, not expansion, but transformation. That evening, Arav walked through the empty halls. The lights dimmed behind him as the sun dipped below the city skyline. He stopped at the wall of stories, the "This Is Me" board. In the middle, he pinned one more photo, a black and white picture of an old man laughing beside a younger man in a worn yellow cab. And underneath, just one sentence: "He left different than he came. That's all any of us can ask." Arav stepped back, wiped a tear, and smiled softly. Then he turned out the lights and walked into the night. The day had finally arrived. The company's annual summit, once a cold corporate affair, now buzzed with something different. Warmth, hope, curiosity. Employees had flown in from every state. People who had once worked in silence were now standing in clusters, laughing, sharing stories, hugging like family. The lobby held portraits of janitors, interns, former cab drivers, veterans, and single mothers who had once sat quietly in the background, now front and center. But the most talked about detail was the empty chair on the stage. Beside it, a sign, "Reserved for who you used to be." No one knew what it meant. Not yet. At exactly 11:00 a.m., Arav stepped onto the stage. No grand entrance, just him. He didn't need a spotlight anymore. The crowd fell silent as he looked out, not at a company, but at a room full of stories. Survivors, skeptics, dreamers, people who had made mistakes and still showed up. He adjusted the mic, then smiled. "You know," he began softly, "I used to drive a yellow cab through the streets of this city. Back then, most people didn't look at me. They talked about me, never to me. He paused, letting that settle. Some told me to go back to where I came from. Others mocked my accent. Once, a man asked me if I'd ever heard of deodorant. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. Arav smiled again, gentler this time. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I just kept driving. His voice tightened slightly. But what they didn't know was that the man behind the wheel had once built and lost a company twice the size of the one they worked for. What they didn't see was the man who had buried a wife, raised a son alone, and slept 4 hours a night to pay for school fees. He looked down briefly. People rarely ask about your story when they think they already know your worth. A silence hung heavy in the room now. Heads bowed, hands clenched. But here's the lesson, Arav said, stepping forward. You're not defined by the worst day of your life or by the worst things someone ever said to you. He gestured to the empty chair. That chair, he said, is for who you used to be, the part of you that got broken along the way, that was told you weren't enough, that stayed silent when it should have spoken, that hurt others before you learned better. He paused. And I want you to know it's okay. You can forgive that version of yourself. You can sit beside it. You can outgrow it. A few people in the crowd wiped tears. Arav took a deep breath. Howard Bell used to be a cruel man. You all heard his letter last month. He came into this building broken by life, full of bitterness. But he left a better man, not because he was perfect, but because he tried. And that is all we can ask of each other. A soft murmur of agreement swept the room. Arav's voice softened even more. Everyone in this room, everyone watching online right now, you have someone like Howard in your life, someone you've given up on, someone who gave up on you. Or maybe it's you who feels forgotten. He pointed gently. Call them, forgive them, or forgive yourself. Don't wait until the funeral. Don't wait until the letter is read by someone else. The screen behind him lit up, showing photos from across the company, smiles, embraces, sticky notes with handwritten encouragements. This company isn't just a business anymore, Arav said. It's proof that dignity has ROI, that humanity builds better legacies than spreadsheets ever could. He smiled through misty eyes. And if I, a once silent immigrant cab driver, can one day sit at this table, not to rule but to restore, then you too can rise above whatever you were told you'd never be. The audience rose to their feet, slowly at first, then all at once. Applause echoed off the walls. Some wept openly, others just nodded, clinging to the truth they'd heard. Arav stepped back and whispered into the mic. Kindness is not weakness. Forgiveness is not foolish. And sometimes the person you mock today is the one you'll thank tomorrow. As employees filtered out of the auditorium, many stayed behind, lingering in the lobby, touching the This Is Me board, leaving new notes. A young woman who had once hidden her identity as a former foster child pinned up her story for the first time. A retired Marine shared a photo of his PTSD service dog and a note thanking the company for making him feel like more than his trauma. And in a quiet corner, a man knelt by the empty chair. He whispered something to it. No one heard what he said, but he stood up straighter afterward. Arav walked back to his office, alone. He passed the conference room where nearly 2 years ago, 3 young men had mocked him to his face. Now, one of them ran the company's mentorship program. Another had apologized and meant it. The third had left, but sent an email saying, "You taught me more in silence than any boss ever did with words." On his desk sat an envelope from his son. Inside, a single photo of Arav holding a cab door open with one hand and shielding a little boy from the rain with the other. And one sentence written in shaky handwriting. You never stopped driving for me. I see that now. I love you, Papa. Arav pressed the photo to his heart and cried. So maybe you're wondering, why did I share this story? Because someone out there, maybe you, needed to hear it. Maybe you were the taxi driver doing everything you could and still being mocked. Maybe you were the person in the back seat laughing at someone else's pain until life humbled you. Or maybe you're Howard, near the end, and wondering if it's too late to be good again. It's not. And maybe, just maybe, you're Arav, the quiet one, the underestimated one, the one who no one sees coming. But I see you, and I hope this story reminded you of something important, that every person you meet is carrying something you don't see, that your voice matters, even when they laugh, and that silence doesn't mean weakness. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Tell us your story. Tell us about your empty chair. And if you want to see more stories like this, real stories of dignity, resilience, and redemption, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community that believes in second chances. Don't forget to like the video if it meant something to you. Share it with someone who needs it. Because sometimes the smallest story can open the biggest hearts. And if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for listening, for feeling, for remembering that behind every accent, every mistake, every silence, there's a story. And some stories deserve to be seen.